And welcome to the Action Network Fantasy Flex podcast. I am your host, Chris Raybon, joined as always by Sean Koerner. And today we're going to talk tight ends. We got one of our own, Samantha Previte, in the house to talk tight ends with us. Samantha, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. My Fantasy Flex debut.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So for you guys that don't know, Samantha joined the company. How long has it been now, Samantha?
I joined in March, so it's kind of been a while, but it's all been off season. So it's a little harder to really say, a lot of people don't really know me or see me a lot. So I think that people will see me more now that the season's kind of ramping up.
Well, get to know her, guys, because you need to. And we are going to talk all about tight ends, the TE1s today. Sean, what's going on, man?
Not much. Definitely excited for Samantha to join us. All three of us on a pod for the first time. Can't wait. I'm excited to talk tight ends. I just finished my tight end tiers and strategy article, so I'm ready to go.
All right. Yeah, make sure you guys check that out on actionnetwork.com. And before we jump into kind of the tight end by tight end in terms of ADP, Samantha, I just want to ask you generally, what's your tight end strategy heading into 2021? Are you going stud tight end early, or are you waiting for value more often?
I think it partly depends on a lot of different factors, of course, like if there's going to be a tight end premium in that league, but also depends on where I'm drafting. I think if I can get a premium tight end like Kelsey early on, I might be going that route. But in general, I would say that on the 1Z positions, the quarterbacks and tight ends, I'm probably waiting. I think there's a lot of value to be had. And after that kind of first two tiers of tight ends, I feel like it drops off significantly and you can kind of wait for those guys. So that is my general strategy.
Sean, any thoughts on that? Is that kind of how you're going too?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends on the league type, but, you kind of want to get a top 6 tight end. If not, you're basically punting the position. And quarterback, it's okay. It's a viable strategy to stream quarterback. For tight end, it's a nightmare. So I would avoid it if possible. So I do like getting one of the top 6 tight ends. I'm okay with pretty much where all of them are going at ADP. So that's pretty much my overall strategy, is kind of targeting one of those top 6 tight ends. If not, I'm punting, and it's very scary.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the studs are worth it this year. I think it does kind of weak into that 5-6 range. And then, as we will help everyone try to figure out, you're going to have to find a diamond in the rough. You're going to have to find some value, because the ideal is to find one guy. You don't want to have to be switching guys in and out based on matchup. The tight end sample size numbers in terms of defense, it's just a lot of volatility and randomness and things like that. So you don't really want to be searching for tight end come the middle of the season. So hopefully we can help you guys out in your draft strategies. Let's get right into it with the consensus number 1 tight end. That is Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. And Samantha, I'll ask you a 2-part question. Number 1, if you're up early in the draft in the first round, are you going Kelsey or Tyreek? And then number 2, does the fact that Kelsey's entering his age 32 season worry you at all?
I am going Kelsey if it's between Kelsey and Tyreek early on in that late first round, early second round. I think that the distance between Kelsey and tight end 2 and Tyreek and the next guy, I think Tyreek is in that range, that same kind of tier with Diggs and Adams. So I don't think there's a huge separation there, but Kelsey is significantly better, I think, than the rest of the group. So if it's between those guys, I'm definitely going Travis Kelce. And the age 32 season doesn't really worry me. He's just been so dominant, even in the past couple of years. Finished as tight end 1 last year, nearly 60 points more than the second guy, Darren Waller. He's got a ridiculous target share. And yeah, he's just been so dominant over 4 seasons of the last 5 seasons, finished as the top tight end for fantasy. So not concerned at all. Don't think he's going to drop off this year.
Sean, same question for you. Kelsey or Tyreek, and then any concerns about the age?
Yeah, I would definitely lean Kelsey over Tyreek, just because of the drop off of the position. It's pretty steep at tight end, whereas wide receiver, it's so deep. So it's more of a gradual drop off. I'm okay taking Kelsey in the top 5, top 6. However, I do prefer taking him like at the end of the first round, because if you have, let's say you have like pick 5 or 6, you can probably get Darren Waller to make it back to you, or even round 3. So I've been kind of treating the draft in 2 halves there. So love getting Kelsey at the end of the first round. He gives you such a huge edge. Like Samantha mentioned, he's finished as the top tight end for the past 5 seasons. And the only season he didn't, he finished second. So he just gives you a massive, massive edge. And I'm not worried about him slowing down at 32. Even if he does decline a little bit, it's going to get offset with Patrick Mahomes entering his prime at 26. So you have an ascending player like Patrick Mahomes that could offset any potential decline. So I'm not worried about that either.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think Kelsey's age is going to be an issue. And I think he's actually a little bit of a safer pick than Tyreek, especially when you consider that Tyreek's been having some health issues in camp, a little bit, with the lower body. So you never like to see that. I don't know if it's a huge issue, but I think that just kind of tilts the scale a little more toward Kelsey. And yeah, even if you have some drop off, like you said, Samantha, because of the age, there's still such a gap between him and Darren Waller. And, even last year it was over 30 PPR points, and Waller played one more game and had an excellent season. He had 107 catches, 1,196 yards, and 9 touchdowns. And Kelsey only played 15 games, still beat him by 30 PPR points, 30 plus. So really like Kelsey as the number 1 tight end. Number 2, George Kittle, I'm still seeing in a lot of ADPs ahead of Waller. Samantha, do you think that is justified? Do you like Kittle over Waller? And what do you think of the potential for Trey Lance to affect his value?
So I am taking Darren Waller over George Kittle. I think we're kind of splitting hairs between the two. In tight end 2, tight end 3, they are right next to each other for me. But that said, I think that Waller finishes higher than Kittle in most scenarios because he will see more targets, and Kittle has more question marks in terms of his injury status and the quarterback situation. I think Lance will probably help Kittle's value, but it is still a question mark at this point. And yeah, when Kittle is on the field, he is super, super dominant, an elite tight end, but there are injury concerns. So that's why I'm putting him one spot below Waller, but at the same time, I think they are neck and neck.
Sean, what do you think about Kittle?
Kittle is probably arguably the best tight end in football right now, but I still think Waller is clearly above him in terms of fantasy. I think that the floor ceiling combo for Kittle is a little bit lower. One of the only really faults with Kittle's game is his lack of touchdown production. He's never top 5 touchdowns in a season. Now, of course, he is due for some positive touchdown regression. I have him projected closer to 6 or 7 this year, but still, I think Waller has a better chance of scoring like 8 or more. So that's a little bit of a concern. And, Trey Lance, it's a bit of an unknown. I think he could lower, the overall passing volume and touchdown, odds for Kittle, but that remains to be seen. Kittle for the first time really has an alpha wide receiver in this offense in Brandon Ayuk. So, that could eat into his target share a little bit more. Whereas, Darren Waller is far and away, the number 1 target in that offense. So I think he's a safer bet here. I'm taking Waller almost every time over Kittle.
Yeah, I think Waller is absolutely safer. I agree, because you look at what Waller's done the last 2 years. He's played in 16 games both times. Then you look at the Raiders offense. I don't think they have the risk of morphing into a super run heavy outfit the way the 49ers have at times under Kyle Shanahan. I do think that defense will be better this year than it was last year, which could hurt a little bit. So I think Trey Lance does lower Kittle's projections a bit, because if you look at what Lance did in college, he was a guy that would scramble on over 10% of his dropbacks. Now, we know Jimmy Garoppolo is not the type to scramble. Anytime he drops back, he's almost always going to get the ball out. So there just might be not quite as many targets to go around per Lance drop back as there was per Jimmy Garoppolo drop back. So that's not ideal. And then Kittle, ever since that monster season, he has been trending down a little bit with the health. He hasn't been on the field quite as much. He's gone from a 16 game season where he put up 1,377 yards to a 14-game season the next year, where he put up 1,053 yards, and then just 8 games last year and 634 yards. So I think that, that big season, maybe, I don't know if it took something out of him, I don't know, but the health hasn't been as pristine as Waller. So for all those reasons, I think that Waller is the right choice for the number 2 tight end in fantasy this year. I think Kittle is just a little bit riskier, but I want to get a little more in depth with Waller, because we kind of, started this conversation talking about Kittle. So Samantha, does anything change, I guess, for Waller this year? Is this kind of what to expect? The same thing that we've seen out of him the last 2 years, the go-to guy for the Raiders, 90 catches in 2019, 107 last year.
Yeah, I think this is definitely what we should be expecting. He is, like Sean said, definitely the alpha in this offense. And I think that that's kind of rare in terms of tight ends. So you're getting a ridiculous number of targets. He averaged 9.1 targets per game last year, which is second in the league. So I think it'll stay like that, if not better, moving into 2021. So I think that's really what makes him such an attractive option at tight end 2, because he has such a safe floor. And I think he has a really, really high ceiling.
Yeah, Sean, any thoughts on Waller? He went from 3 touchdowns in 16 games in 2019 to 9 in 16 games in 2020. So do you see him kind of settling in between that as far as the touchdown regression?
Yeah, his breakout season in 2019, it was pretty clear that he deserved more than 3 touchdowns on 90 receptions. I mean, he's 6'5", 255 pounds. He's a really good red zone target. So I was calling for massive positive touchdown regression last year. So I wasn't surprised to see the 9 touchdowns. I was surprised, however, to see him, beat out his receptions and yardage totals last year. And I think this year with, Nelson Aguilar, he's leaving behind 82 targets, 13 team high 13 end zone targets. I mean, it's possible that Waller's target share goes up this year, especially in the red zone. I mean, you can't expect Henry Ruggs, Bryan Edwards, and Hunter Renfrow to absorb all those targets. Some are going to go to Waller. So it's scary to think about, Waller's massively high floor and ceiling this year. So I think he could even improve this year, especially if he's healthy for all 17 games. I think he does kind of beat last year's numbers as well.
Yeah. And there's been nothing to really suggest that he won't be. Injuries are tough to predict, but you do like to see a guy that's been able to play full seasons in back-to-back years. So love Darren Waller as the number 2. A lot of times he still goes as the 3rd tight end off the board. I think that should be reversed with Kittle. Let's move on to Kyle Pitts, who is, of course, in year 1, notoriously a difficult year for tight ends. Tight ends usually break out year 2, year 3 at the earliest, but Samantha, the market seems to have a lot of confidence in Kyle Pitts with the Atlanta Falcons. Do you think it is warranted Pitts to be going over some more established guys like Mark Andrews and TJ Hawkinson?
Yeah, this is definitely the start of the next year with Pitts, Andrews, and Hawkinson. I think that they're very similar. I think you could make a case for either 3 of them to go number 4, and they would all be legit. And you could make a case for either 3 of them to go number 6, and it would totally be legit. That said, I've been pretty high on Kyle Pitts this offseason. I wrote a roundtable thing with Mike Randall, who argued with me against him, of course, because of the bad history for rookie tight ends. And I totally understand that. That said, I think that the position has evolved a lot over the years. I think what we've seen in terms of the usage of tight ends in much more of a wide receiver capacity has really, really just grown. And I think that that's how the Falcons offense will use him. If they use him more as a blocker, which is really his biggest weakness, I think that they will be criminally misusing him. So I think that we'll see a significant target share, especially with Julio Jones no longer in that offense. And, the Falcons taking him at 4 overall is not just like using an early draft pick. That's also I know a lot of people thought that they might go quarterback and kind of start this rebuild. So that kind of made a statement, I feel like, and they're just not going to, not use him in his first year. So I think that he deserves to go 4. Like I said, I think the 3 are very, very close, but I totally buy into the hype.
Yeah, that's well said, because once the Falcons took him at number 4, not only were they saying, hey, we're going forward with Matt Ryan, we want to use this guy Pitts, but they also were saying we're going to live with our defense without a high pick, to help that, which is only going to, I think, kind of keep them in game scripts that would favor the pass. So all those things are good. Sean, I know you're into the median projections, and I got to say, from a median standpoint, rookie tight ends generally do not produce at a level that would warrant being taken as a top 5 tight end. So where are you on Kyle Pitts headed into 2021?
Yeah, so the tight end position usually takes a couple years for a player to adjust to the NFL. So, I mean, to put things in perspective, in order for Kyle Pitts to hit at ADP, he has to, have the best fantasy football season by a rookie tight end since Keith Jackson back in 1988, back when the only person playing fantasy football was my father, Ken Koerner. So, just putting that in perspective, that's what you're saying when you're taking him, 4th off the board at tight end. Now, if there was a player worth betting on, it would be Kyle Pitts, because he is a generational talent and he's going to be the number 2 target in a pass heavy offense. So, I probably won't be the guy taking him at, 4th overall at tight end, but if he falls to me at 6, like Samantha mentioned, this tier is so critical, because at the end of this tier, that's it for me. I'm not drafting a tight end, and that really throws a wrench in my overall draft strategy. So I'm just trying to get whichever tight end, falls to me at like tight end 5 or 6 here. So if that's Kyle Pitts, great, but I'm probably not taking him here at 4, just because, like we've said, the historical implications of a rookie tight end going off there aren't many examples. So you're taking a bit of a risk here, but he does seem like, the talent capable of doing that. So I'm kind of torn here.
Yeah, it's tough, because I think anytime you have a talented rookie, I think what happens is when you're in a fantasy draft, you kind of get FOMO. Like, you don't want to miss out on the shiny new toy who just might set the league on fire immediately and be one of the top players at his position. But with that being said, I do see some risks with Kyle Pitts. I mean, number one, only 4 rookie tight ends since the merger have had 700 or more yards receiving in their rookie years. So that's really what Kyle Pitts is going to need, that and probably more, to pay off his ADP. And then you look at the way the Falcons are kind of set up here. And yes, they got Arthur Smith, who notoriously favors multi-tight end sets. He's going to be the head coach coming over from Tennessee, but you also have another capable guy there in Hayden Hurst. And I'm not saying Hurst is going to be like schemed or game planned for targets above Pitts necessarily, but it's a guy that, he could take some snaps that, if you had Pitts and nobody else, or you're like a 1 tight end team, I think Pitts's snap share would be a little bit more locked in. We don't know exactly just how many snaps he's going to play. This could always be something like a Mark Andrews situation, which ironically, Andrews, I believe his rookie year was also competing with Hurst and a couple other guys for snaps as well, and very talented receiving tight end, but still didn't quite live up to, top 5 his rookie year. You look at a guy like George Kittle, very talented. Sean mentioned probably the best, most talented tight end in the league right now. His rookie year on a pretty shaky San Francisco team, 15 games, 63 targets, 43 catches, 515 yards. And then we got the 1377 yards in year 2. So I do think we have to kind of temper expectations a little bit with Kyle Pitts. I think the value has been drafted out of him if he's going as the 4th tight end off the board. You would have liked to see him, I think, closer to 6 to start, at least giving him, some upside there to jump into the top 5. But now you're really kind of banking on him being the best tight end, the best rookie tight end we've seen ever. So yeah, probably a guy I'm not going to have as much exposure to as some other people. But let's go to Mark Andrews, a guy who kind of similar, I think, reminiscent a little bit of Pitts not necessarily from a pedigree perspective, but I think in the way his game is, receiving first tight end, will he play all the snaps, going to be, on a team that likes to play multiple tight ends. Samantha, Mark Andrews, he's been the one that's kind of caught the raw deal, because I think if there wasn't this generational rookie, Mark Andrews would probably be the number 4 tight end, but he's down at number 5 in ADP. Never quite been a guy to play a full complement of snaps. That's really the only thing that's held him back. What do you see happening with Andrews this year? Is he a top 5 tight end for you?
I think he's a top 5 guy. Like I said, I think there's not too much distance between the 4 and the 6 spots here. His downfall has been the snap count and targets. I think he ranked 8th last year in targets among tight ends. The scheme definitely doesn't favor him. That said, he's super consistent. And I think that he gives, of the 3 guys in this tier, probably, I think, the safest range of outcomes. So like I said, you could definitely make a strong case for him to be taken at 4. So it really could go either way. He finished as tight end 5 last year. I think that's a very reasonable expectation for him this year. Like, if you're taking him at 4 and he finishes as 5, you're not like upset, obviously, too.
Absolutely not. And the great thing about him is, even though the scheme and some other things don't necessarily favor him in terms of the low pass volume, he is essentially their number 1 target. Right. So when he's on the field, they're looking for him. His target per route numbers are really good. Sean, 10 touchdowns in 2019 from Mark Andrews, 7 in 2020. Is this a guy we can count on for that high number of touchdowns year in, year out? Because if not, then that's where I think it starts to get shaky. That's where I think the floor starts to really decrease. And maybe he's not worth that pick if we can't, lock in those touchdowns. So where are you on that touchdown projection for Mark Andrews?
Yeah, I think certainly we can bank on him being a pretty prolific touchdown scorer. It's funny that year he broke out with 10 touchdowns. He did on limited snaps, like you said. He was competing with Nick Boyle and Hayden Hurst. And then last year, especially after Nick Boyle went down and Hayden Hurst is on the Falcons, he was averaging 80 to 85% routes run per dropback, but his efficiency took a hit. So that's why I think he does offer a pretty high floor now with the playing time, but also he has a super high ceiling if he were to return to those efficiency levels we saw back in 2019. And I think you could kind of put some blame on Lamar Jackson last year. I mean, Mark Andrews finishes the tight end 5 despite Lamar Jackson having a really bad season. So I think I'm expecting Lamar Jackson to bounce back in a big way this year, and Mark Andrews will certainly benefit. So that's why right now he's my tight end 4. Granted, I have about 1 fantasy point separating these 3 tight ends, so it's not that big of a deal. But right now I have him over Kyle Pitts and TJ Hawkinson.
Yeah, and the snaps are always going to be, I think, what you have to look for Andrews, because his routes per drop back went up a little bit, but he still only played 80% of the total snaps once last year. That was in week 11 against the Titans. And he only played more than 70% of the snaps 4 times. So, he's kind of game script dependent in a way, right? Like, you think of running backs like that, but it's if the Ravens are in their run heavy scripts, this guy a lot of times is not going to get as many routes as we want, even if he's on the field for a high percentage of them. So it's tough with him, but I do think that the touchdowns are here to stay, because Lamar Jackson has kind of proven that he will, he will be a above average touchdown percentage guy these last 2 years. And those touchdowns are going to go to Andrews first. Those red zone targets are going to go to him first. So I still like him for 7+ touchdowns at least. But a guy I really like, and I actually am at the point where I think I like him above Mark Andrews, is TJ Hawkinson. So Samantha, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Hawkinson. Now entering year 3, does have a new coaching regime here with Dan Campbell, new quarterback with Jared Goff. A big lack of wide receiver depth on this Lions team, which means it could be a big target share for Hawkinson. Where are you with Hawkinson entering his 3rd year?
Yeah, all 3 of these guys have a lot of plus sides going for them, and then a lot of things going against him, of course, too. Hawkinson, he's ridiculously talented. And the things going for him would be lack of wide receivers. Yeah, that's probably a criminal understatement, with the state of the Lions depth chart being Tyrell Williams and Quintez Cephas and Rashad Perriman. None of those guys, I think, are really going to be a wide receiver one or really distinguish themselves this season. So TJ Hawkinson is going to be that top option in that offense. That said, what's dragging him down is going to be Jared Goff. I'm very, very concerned about what we saw last season. And there's a really good chance that this whole offense just is very anemic. And that really concerns me from a touchdown perspective, especially with Hawkinson being a tight end. So, I think there's a lot of risk, but that said, he's been really, really strong in the couple seasons that we have seen him. So that's why he deserves to be in this tier, but there are some concerns for sure.
Sean, where are you with Hawkinson?
So like I mentioned, I just wrapped up my tight end tiers and strategy article, and I pretty much found that TJ Hawkinson is the most valuable tight end in my overall draft strategy. Like I mentioned, this tier, it's so tight, but once it's off the board, that's it. Like my plans are out the window and I'm punting the position altogether. And, TJ Hawkinson is usually the last tight end drafted from this tier, which is, if you haven't read my articles, I love taking players at the end of a tier before a huge drop off. So, when I go in my draft, I would love to come out with TJ Hawkinson, but it's a bit risky because if he gets taken off the board, I'm screwed. So that's why I call him my most important tight end in my draft. But, you guys mentioned all the reasons I'm in love with him this year. He's 24, entering year 3. I mean, he's entering his prime. He's going to be Goff's number 1 target this year. The Lions probably have the worst wide receiver depth chart in the league. But also, Tyrell Williams and Rashad Perriman, they're more of the deep threat type of receivers that Jared Goff really doesn't like targeting. So that could lead to even more targets for TJ Hawkinson. And the Lions should provide plenty of negative game scripts. So I'm not worried about pass volume or anything like that. I just consider him a really high floor ceiling type of pick, and just one of the most valuable picks I think you can make in rounds 5 or 6.
Yeah, I love Hawkinson. I think when I look at this tier, I think he's the guy over a Kyle Pitts who, but rookies do have that cap ceiling. Andrews, I think, is going to have a cap ceiling because of the low pass volume and because of the snap counts. I don't really see that cap ceiling for TJ Hawkinson. I think he's that one tight end in the second tier that could legitimately finish as the tight end 1 overall if things break right. I think he's the one guy that could truly challenge Kelsey, challenge Darren Waller in that next tier, because even the things that kind of work against him, maybe in theory, like a quarterback downgrade to Jared Goff, as you mentioned, Sean, this is a guy who, and we've gotten reports in camp that isn't throwing the ball down the field. You have a bad team. So that means more pass scripts. You have so many things kind of working in Hawkinson's favor here that I think you could see one of those Kittle-like seasons where, let's remember, Kittle had that 1,300-yard season, not just because of his talent and everything, but because of that was before San Francisco's defense was really great. That was before San Francisco was really a great team. And so you had this situation where they didn't have great wide receiver depth and they were behind and, had a quarterback that wasn't really going downfield either in Jimmy G, and everything just kind of worked out. And I could see that season for TJ Hawkinson in his range of outcomes. Can't really see it for Andrews or Kyle Pitts, as talented as they are. So really like TJ Hawkinson as that number 1 tight end you're drafting in that second tier. So as the TE4. Let's go to the back half, because this is where things start to get really dicey. Noah Fant is the tight end 7 off the board. Samantha, he has a good defense. He has there's a crowded wide receiver corps, shaky quarterback play. Maybe there's a lot of things kind of getting in the way of Fant, who I look at as like the TJ Hawkinson. I feel like Fant's the guy with everything going wrong, for him in terms of the circumstances, kind of the opposite. But where are you on Noah Fant?
Yeah, it's tough because I feel like I was definitely all in on Fant's breakout last season. And he's obviously extremely talented, has all the physical attributes to be a really successful tight end. Now, that said, he's got a lot of things working against him. You mentioned the defense, the crowded receiver core. I think Judy and Cortland Sutton are going to have great years. The shaky quarterback situation. At this point, I think Locke is the betting favorite at plus 100 to take that job, which I kind of assume is not great for Fant. I don't know where you guys actually stand on which quarterback is going to be better for Fant, since Fant, like tight ends generally can overcome some shaky quarterback play. But yeah, I mean, a lot of things have just not set him up for success. So it's really difficult to make a case for him at tight end 7. I think, he's fallen a lot in a lot of drafts that I've done into the double digits, maybe into tight end 10 through 12. I think you could definitely make a case for him to be down there as well.
Yeah, it just seems like he's a guy that could frustrate despite all the talent. But Sean, where are you on Noah Fant?
Yeah, so I have nothing wrong with Noah Fant. I think he's one of the best up and coming tight ends in the game. But, as you mentioned, this defense should be pretty good. The quarterback situation's really subpar, and it's a crowded wide receiver depth chart. Like, it's hard to see how Fant's going to provide you the consistency you'd want from a tight end. That's why I'm saying I'm avoiding this tier altogether, because you can make a case for like the next 8 to 12 guys. Like, they all have a compelling case why they could hit or why they could bust. And I looked last year, we were sort of in a similar situation where guys like Evan Ingram, Hayden Hurst, Tyler Higbee, and Hunter Henry were going in this range, round 7 through 8. And I feel like if you were to use a round 7 or 8 draft pick on them, you would hang on to them for a little bit too long, because they all became droppable at points last year. So it's sort of the sunk cost fallacy where you're just hanging on them just because you spent high draft capital on them. But you kind of want flexibility in this range, because there's some guys that could pop up. Last year it was Logan Thomas, Robert Tunyan, like guys like that you probably missed out on because you're hanging on these guys because you drafted them so early. So I think at this point in the draft, it's better to just punt, take a flyer late in the draft, and just kind of play the waiver wire until you get a guy that hits, or you can just draft one of the top 6 tight ends like we've been saying. But that's kind of why I'm avoiding a guy like Fant, where I think he does deserve to be the tight end 7. It's just he sits atop a massive, massive tier. So that's why I'm probably not going to be drafting him too much.
Yeah, I'm right there. Fant kind of strikes me similarly to Kyle Pitts, where the talent is going to get a lot of smart people on board, but it just seems to me that at this average draft position, everything's going to have to go right just for him to pay it off. And there's not a lot of room for him to beat it, because even if you think Fant is more talented than Hawkinson, you have to consider the likely target difference on a week-to-week basis, just because the Lions are likely going to be bad, because there's not the same type of target competition coming from the wide receiver position for Hawkinson that it is for Fant. So I could see Fant not paying off, not even being a top 10 tight end. He was 11th last year, but I could see him in that same range. And I think it's just going to be very frustrating from one week to the next to actually predict when he's going to have a big game, because he will have big games. He's very talented. The defense does have other guys to worry about, but there may not be much of a rhyme or reason to who goes off when in this Denver receiving corps, especially if their defense is as good as it looks on paper. Dallas Goddard. This is a guy I think we've been wanting to love since he was drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles. And now he's like a tease, because the Eagles keep saying, or we keep hearing, Zach Ertz is gone. He's going to be traded, but he's still there. There's reports that he may go to this team or that team, but he's still there. And he's actually been having a pretty good camp. So Samantha, how are you treating Goddard, given that Ertz is still on the roster as of early August?
Yeah, it's really difficult, because I think he vaults himself into that second tier with Hawkinson, Andrews, and Pitts if Ertz is not on the field. But that said, the ghost of Ertz is lurking, and we really don't know how that's going to work. And I feel like the Eagles will use 2 tight ends if Ertz stays. So it's very difficult to say. I think, like you said, he's a guy that I feel like the fantasy community has just been waiting for his like big year. And he finished as 10-19 through 11 games last season. So like I said, I think he has the potential to be up there with the next tier, but the opportunity right now isn't looking super great, especially with a scheme that may not necessarily favor a ton of throwing at the Eagles.
Yeah, because I think that's very well put, because if Jalen Hurts remains a quarterback, it's a similar situation to what I think, could happen with if Trey Lance takes over in San Francisco, where these guys just scramble on, 10% plus of their dropbacks. And so that's going to take a few targets away. And you're also probably just going to call a less pass heavy game plan, with a guy like Jalen Hurts than you had with Carson Wentz, I think, for all those years. So it's a little bit of a weird situation. I think that Goddard could be like a Hawkinson if it were for the pass volume, if Ertz left, because I think the Eagles may still be on the bad side. I think near the bottom of the division, some pass heavy game scripts, not a lot at wide receiver, especially if Devonta Smith is struggling with any type of injuries that linger. So I do think there's that upside there, but it hasn't fallen quite into place yet the way it has for Hawkinson. Sean, where are you on Dallas Goddard? I know you've always been pretty high on him over the years.
Yeah, last year I remember banging the drum on just drafting him as a high upside stash just in case Zach Ertz went down. So I am very, interested to see what happens with Zach Ertz. If he stays in Philly, like, you're overpaying for Goddard at 8. And another guy that I said, like, you're going to hang on for too long because you're spending high draft capital on. But even if Zach Ertz were to get traded, I don't think Goddard would necessarily come close to the tier we talked about with Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews, and TJ Hawkinson. That's why he's a pass for me. You mentioned it, like, it would be one thing if, Ertz got traded away and Carson Wentz was still quarterback. We know that Carson Wentz loves targeting his tight ends. We're still unsure what to expect from Jalen Hurts. But, last year in a 3-game sample, granted, it's a small sample size, but when Jalen Hurts was quarterback and Zach Ertz was there, Goddard finishes the tight end 25. So, not a fan of small sample size, but that was not great to see. So, Goddard has a ton of downside. Obviously, I think, I'm a Dallas Goddard stan. I think he has top 5 potential, but just there's too many factors going against him right now to warrant taking him at tight end 8.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let me ask you this, Sean, if Ertz is traded, let's say he's traded, yeah, where does Goddard end up in your rankings?
I think he would definitely be tight end 7. And I think he'd actually be his own tier between the tier 4 of Pitts, Hawkinson, and Andrews, and then Dallas Goddard by himself. And then the next 4 or 5 guys. So I think he would make a case to be in his own tier where he would be a good backup plan. I keep talking about like TJ Hawkinson's go big or go home plan for me. Like, I want him, but if I don't get him, I'm screwed. Dallas Goddard would now be sort of a safety net play for me if Ertz were traded away. That's how I'd view it.
What about you, Samantha? Do you see Goddard kind of in his own tier at TE7 if Ertz is traded, or you still put him in that, lump with all the other guys?
Yeah, I think you could definitely make a case for him being at the bottom of that second tier or in a tier of its own, as Sean put it. I think when I said that he could be in that tier, a lot of things would have to go right, Ertz being gone, and maybe a little bit of a shift in that offense. Hopefully the Eagles are a little bit of a better team in that scenario. So yeah, I think it would be difficult for him to necessarily finish in that tight end 4 to 6 range. So yeah, he feels like a little bit below those guys, but it would certainly improve his status.
Speaking of improving their status, Logan Thomas was an NFL journeyman who made a position switch heading into last year. And then he became one of the most prolific tight ends in the league. Now he's going as the 9th tight end off the board. Samantha, thoughts on Logan Thomas? Because this dude just came out of nowhere last year.
Yeah, there was a couple of guys that I feel like just came out of nowhere that were in that group of like Robert Tunyan, but also not even just tight ends. I mean, like James Robinson comes to mind, and that group of people that like we just really didn't necessarily know a ton about. And even on his own team, Antonio Gibson, like I think that it's interesting because in some sports, like for instance, in like fantasy baseball, there's a huge like Yankees premium that you pay. I think there's the opposite for Washington in a lot of like normal lay people drafts, that people just have for so long thought that the Washington football team was kind of trash and no one really wanted any part of them for fantasy purposes. So interestingly, Logan Thomas being at 9, like I got him in the last spot of a CVS expert draft, actually, which literally seems egregious to me that I got him in the last pick. Like, yeah. So, I mean, I don't think that I'm not expecting tight end 6 numbers, which is where he finished last year in PPR, but in half PPR. But I certainly think that he deserves to be in this tier. He could certainly finish anywhere between, I think, 7 and 10 feels reasonable. Washington had one of the best sneaky free agencies and off seasons, I think. So they'll be competitive. One thing that does maybe concern me a little bit is Ryan Fitzpatrick's track record with fantasy tight ends not being super, super high on tight ends in the past. So we'll kind of see how that offense plays out. But that said, Ryan Fitzpatrick is a significant upgrade from their weird menagerie of quarterbacks last year. So I have high hopes for him.
Yeah, Logan Thomas, man. Ryan Fitzpatrick, you start to say, oh, well, Fitzpatrick maybe hasn't been the best for tight ends, but you look at the guys they were trotting out last year. I mean, Alex Smith, Taylor Heineke, Kyle Allen. It just wasn't a great group of quarterbacks. So I do think that situation will improve regardless. Sean, where are you on Mr. Logan Thomas?
Yeah, I'm okay with Thomas going 9th off the board at tight end. I think you're sort of buying playing time at this point. Only Travis Kelce ran more routes than him last year. That's such a critical stat when it comes to tight ends too, because not all tight ends, run a lot of routes. It's a position where you can block a lot and, get phased out of the passing game. So I think that is the main selling point with Thomas. But he was pretty inefficient with his routes. Last year, he had a 1.14 yards per route run, which was 32nd out of 43 tight ends, which is not good. So I think, and his target share will probably take a hit now that they made a significant upgrade at wide receiver 2 with Curtis Samuel, and even Adam Humphries in the slot, I think could siphon plenty of targets away from Logan Thomas. So I think, the lesson with Logan Thomas is what Samantha said. She was able to get him the last round last year. I think those are the kind of guys once you get to this range that we're trying to hit on. And every year there seems to be a guy that breaks out. Last year's Robert Tunyan, Logan Thomas. The year before that, it was Darren Waller. The year before that was George Kittle. So I think in this range, I'll pass at all tight ends in, this round 7 through 9 ADP, and then just, shoot for the moon later in the draft and play the waiver wire. I think Logan Thomas is kind of an example that you can kind of strike gold later on at tight end.
Yeah, I think I'm actually okay with Thomas here. He's one of the few guys in this tier, in this like back half of the tight ends that I'm okay with. And it is because of the playing time. Yep. Routes are just so hard to come by for tight ends. And Logan Thomas, forget routes. Like this was a guy who was on the field as a blocker and as a receiver. He just wasn't coming off. His median snap rate, I should say, last season was 95%. That is unheard of for a tight end. He's essentially not coming off the field, and he had a 32.1% red zone target share last year, which was 4th in the entire league. So, and of course, leading the Washington football team. So just a couple of really good indicators that he should have a high floor, even if he is somewhat inefficient relative to his peers that are getting so much playing time. But I do think some of that inefficiency was also due to the quarterback situation last year. I mean, there's not going to be that many yards per route run when you're talking about Kyle Allen and Alex Smith and Taylor Heineke, because there's not many yards per dropback, not many yards per attempt there. So I do like Thomas. I think he's the one guy that I really feel like he won't kill you even if he's not a sexy pick. And also, I think when it comes to like this Washington wide receiver 2, upgrade, like on paper, they added some guys, but I don't know how much it's truly going to affect Thomas, because I think, number one, I don't know if they're going to use Curtis Samuel the right way, given that they kind of used him as an outside receiver. And that was really what kind of Washington, what they would need a little more, if they were going to upgrade on, let's say, a guy like Cam Sims or whatever. But also and then Adam Humphries is a cut candidate. Like, he may not make the team. So we just really don't know exactly what's going to happen. De'Ami Brown, I thought
you were projecting Humphries for over 60 receptions though. What happened to that?
I mean, the more I read about camp, it's just not set in stone. Like, it's just,
right.
We don't yet know exactly. And then Samuel's been struggling with injuries. So we really just don't know what they're going to do. And I think a lot of it is going to depend on Brown and how much he develops. You could see a starting lineup with McLaurin, Brown, and Sims, or you could see it with, a true slot guy like Humphries, or Samuel in the slot. Like, we don't know what's going to happen based on the injuries and everything. But I just think it's hard to come by that like 90+% snap share at tight end. So I'm fine with Thomas. I'm not avoiding him. It's not sexy, but I think you do give yourself some interesting upside anytime you're talking about a guy that's going to be on the field for almost every snap at this position. Speaking of a guy in snaps, Rob Gronkowski, kind of on the other end of that, not a guy at this stage in his career that is going to play a full complement of snaps. Samantha, you have Gronk, who turned into more of a blocker during the Bucs Super Bowl run in the postseason. You still have Cameron Brate there, and you have OJ Howard. Is Gronk a top 10 tight end given all of this, uncertainty, or what do you think of Gronk heading into this year?
Yeah, he finished his tight end 8 last season, and I have no problem taking him as a top 12 tight end. I don't feel with any certainty that he's going to finish as a top 10 guy. I mean, I don't think there's a huge difference between there, but, we did see a period of him kind of readjusting to the league, getting back into shape, and then kind of gaining momentum towards the end of the season. Yeah, we did see him as a bit of a more of a blocker too. And I am a little concerned about OJ Howard. Like, he's a guy that I actually had as a top sleeper candidate last season, gets injured really, really early. He was on my Scott Fishbowl team. Cool stuff. But so I think he will take away some snaps, but that chemistry with Brady and all that, I think he gives you a nice, floor later in the draft. So if you're going to wait on tight end, I think Gronk makes sense, as a late round guy.
Sean, where are you on Gronk? Samantha mentioned she thinks he has a pretty high floor. Is that how you see it for Gronk?
He has a high floor in that, this is going to be one of the best offenses again this year. So he's a touchdown dependent tight end that will probably score a lot of touchdowns. So that's nice. But you should not be drafting him number 10 at tight end. This is an ADP that kind of makes sense in like your home league where, he has the name recognition. He could go in the top 10, but like expert high stakes drafts, he's going as low as like tight end 18. There's just too much not to like about him this year. Samantha mentioned it, OJ Howard. I mean, Rob Gronkowski was pretty much irrelevant weeks 1 through 4 when OJ Howard was playing. OJ Howard was the top fancy tight end for the Bucs. And then we didn't see Gronk really break out until OJ Howard went down. Well, OJ Howard's back. So I'm expecting Gronk, to be more of a 2 to 3 way tight end committee. It's a mess. I'm avoiding Gronk at all costs in this range. Don't take him inside the top 10.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I don't actually think he has that high of a floor because there's just so much uncertainty with how this tight end rotation is going to break out. And Gronk is a very respected and valued blocker, even at this stage in his career. And that's why I think you saw him disappear in terms of the offense at times. And this Tampa Bay offense, even though you have a high floor in the sense of Tom Brady's at quarterback, we saw what he can do even at his advanced age. You're also competing with Mike Evans. You're competing with Chris Godwin. You're competing with Antonio Brown. You're competing with Giovanni Bernard, maybe. So, I mean, there's just so many targets on this team to go around that on a week-to-week basis, I just feel like I'm not going to have a lot of success or an edge, I guess you could say, predicting when Gronk is going to have his big games. He had 3 or fewer receptions in 14 of his 20 games last year. So that is 70%. So I just think there's a low weekly floor with this guy, even though he proved that he still can play. And he's not like completely washed. I think the year off did him good. 20 games, probably not ideal, for him to play 20 games. So I think the year to draft him was actually last year. This year, I just see the floor a little lower. And I mean, this guy played in 20 out of 20 games last year. I don't know if I see that continuing. Going forward. Remember, this guy was always a guy who you counted on for a couple missed games most seasons. So not really feeling that great about Rob Gronkowski. Mike Gaseki, hopefully he's feeling better. Recently got placed on the COVID list, but you look at him last year and he had a pretty good season, all things considered. Finished as the number 7 tight end in PPR leagues with 53 catches, 703 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Samantha, given the additions for Miami at receiver and this recent news for Gaseki, but also the fact that we could see a step forward from Tua, did Gaseki hit his ceiling last year, or is this a guy that can continue to build on his breakout?
I kind of think he hit his ceiling last year. I think tight end 7 is his ceiling for this year. I could see him finishing as a top 12 guy, but he doesn't really have a huge number of targets. So that kind of makes him a little more touchdown dependent. I was concerned about the way Tua looked in this offense and, the additions with Jalen Waddle and everything. I think that could even eat into his targets a little more. So I don't necessarily think that's a great thing for him this season. So I have him kind of at the bottom of this tier and maybe even slipping outside of it.
Yeah, it seems like another guy, as you kind of alluded to, Samantha, just with a low floor, a guy that he's being drafted here because somebody has to, but he could easily go from tight end 11 ADP to like a tight end 18 finish or something like that. Sean, where are you on Mike Gaseki?
Yeah, so Gaseki kind of reminds me of Noah Fant, where, I love him as a tight end. He's one of the best up and coming tight ends entering their prime. But, the Dolphins defense should be pretty good this year. And, I don't expect enough passing yards to go around to, support more than 2 to 3 fancy options a week. So, Jalen Waddle and Will Fuller there, it's going to make Gaseki pretty inconsistent week to week. So, I don't hate his ADP at tight end 11. I think he does offer sort of the upside you do like. But, again, there's guys that you can get practically in the last round of the draft that I think have just as much upside. So, Gaseki, it's a tough call because I love him as a tight end. I think he does have the potential, but I think just the variables around him just limit him. So yeah, I'm avoiding Gaseki pretty much in all my drafts right now.
Yeah, he's not a guy I'm getting much, if any of. And the reason being is he's another guy I think has a low floor because not only the increased target competition, but also because he's another one of those tight ends that he's more of a pass catching specialist and doesn't always see a high complement of snaps. So Miami mentioned, Sean, that they could have a good defense this year. I have a lot of respect for Brian Flores as a head coach. I think Miami can be pretty good. So you look at Gaseki, and his median snaps last year were 66%. So he could be one of those guys that he doesn't see quite as many routes on a per week basis as you need for that top 10 finish. And then you also factor in Miami has a lot of other blocking tight ends and guys that they will bring in situationally. Adam Shaheen, a guy they just gave a big contract to. They also drafted Hunter Long. So Gaseki may not be totally in the future plans either. And there's just a lot of options to kind of rotate here. So this is a situation that even if Miami's passing game improves overall, I don't know how much Gaseki really reaps the benefit of it. I totally agree with you, Samantha. I think he hit his ceiling last year. The number 12 tight end who should be going up the board now that Aaron Rodgers is back in for 2021 is Robert Tunyan. And Samantha, is that really all we needed to see to vault Tunyan into more so the top half of the back end tier rather than the bottom? I mean, I could easily see myself taking Tunyan over Noah Fant like 100 times out of 100 in a draft. So where are you on Tunyan, given that Rodgers is back with the Packers for 2021?
100 times out of 100. That is very bold. I totally think he deserves to be at the top tier of this. I think he was going a lot lower because and we saw that with Aaron Jones. We saw that with Davante Adams, that they were slipping a lot farther in drafts than I think. Like I saw Davante Adams going like the 3rd round in some drafts. And we're not seeing that anymore now that Rodgers, all things point to him playing a full 17 games this season. So that'll really help Tunyan. That said, don't expect 11 touchdowns. That seems definitely outside of the realm of possibilities. He had only 3.7 targets per game, which also makes his floor a little bit less safe, I think, than some of the other guys that were, averaging maybe 5 targets per game, 6 targets per game. But yeah, having Rodgers as your quarterback certainly does not hurt. It's just, a little bit concerning because we're coming off of a year that was totally ridiculous, finishing as tight end 3 with all those touchdowns. You are probably chasing a little bit of a touchdowns, coming year over year, but being part of that Packers offense, I think it makes sense. Sometimes guys, it's like you just want to buy more into certain offenses, like the Bucks or something like that. So that's part of it, is that you're buying into this offense now that Rodgers is back.
Yeah, absolutely. That's there's no secret as to what's given Tunyan his value. I think, Sean and I and Matthew Friedman last year just kind of argued, kind of knew, even though we were arguing different guys, like whoever's that Packers starting tight end is going to have some type of value with Aaron Rodgers. Sean, tight end touchdowns are notoriously fickle, especially at the tight end position, but there's not a lot of reliable guys. So, how confident should drafters be to target Tunyan and just kind of hope for the best in terms of the touchdown equity?
Well, that's essentially what you're doing. You're just hoping for the best, which is not my draft strategy when it comes to tight ends. But, I think Tunyan is certainly the player that benefits the most by having Aaron Rodgers clarity. I think even if it was Jordan Love under center, guys like Davante Adams and, Aaron Jones even would still be worth, round 1 to 2 picks. But Tunyan, he's actually draftable now with Aaron Rodgers because of the touchdown upside. But I don't think he'll be able to come close to his 21.2% touchdown rate last year or his 88% catch rate. So I think I'm expecting some pretty significant regression there, unfortunately. And plus, they're adding 2 quality slot receivers, in my opinion, in Randall Cobb and Amari Rodgers. So I think, that could eat into his target share quite a bit. So, I hate leaning on guys being touchdown dependent. I don't think it's as reliable year to year. Even Aaron Rodgers himself is not going to be able to maintain the 9.1% touchdown rate he threw for last year. So I'm expecting enough regression from Tunyan to not overpay here at tight end 12.
Yeah, I think Tunyan maybe a couple spots higher for me. I think over guys that I just see with less touchdown equity, like Fant and Goddard and even Gronkowski. But I do like Logan Thomas is the one guy. Like I wouldn't compare. I would still take Thomas over Tunyan every time because of the straight up playing time. So Tunyan's kind of in an interesting spot where, you may not, he's probably worth being like the tight end 8 or 9 just based on the touchdown projection, but you probably just don't want to be taking a tight end in that range or doing it too much if you're entering a lot of drafts. So yeah, I'm not super low on Tunyan, but I'm not super high on him either. I think he's like a borderline top 10 tight end, that another guy that in a given week, if he doesn't score a touchdown, almost certainly will hurt you. So that's the top 12. Samantha, I'll start with you. I want to ask you, who's one guy that we haven't talked about that's not going in the top 12 that you like to finish as a startable TE1?
Yeah, it was definitely between 2 guys at this point. I was really torn between Jonnu Smith, especially with the Hunter Henry news. At this point, though, I'm going to go with Adam Troutman, just because of the departure of Jared Cook last season, this offseason. He's being drafted, I think, as tight end 19, and it feels like he's a really good sleeper pick, especially with Michael Thomas, the Michael Thomas news coming out with him being out. I think it's 8 weeks or at least half the season around that. And who knows what what it's going to look like after that, what he's going to look like after that if he has the same explosion. So Adam Troutman feels like a guy that could definitely see a really, really good role in this offense, especially without a really clear de facto number one now. I mean, I guess you could make an argument for Tre'Quan Smith being the de facto number one, but I don't think he's going to take on, Michael Thomas type volume. So I think there will be targets to go around regardless of who wins that quarterback competition.
John, what about you?
So if I miss out on, one of the top 6 tight ends, I love taking a flyer on Irv Smith much later in the draft. So much so that he inspired my outfit today. But all signs point to a breakout season. I mean, he's entering year 3 at 23 years of age. He's played behind Kyle Rudolph his first 2 seasons. And he will be taking over as lead tight end now that Kyle Rudolph is on the Giants. I mean, we saw a sneak peek at the end of last year of his upside when Rudolph was out of the lineup. Weeks 14 through 17, he put up the 4th most points at tight end. So, the Vikings, they ran the most 2 wide receiver sets last season. So Irv Smith is basically the number 3 wide receiver. They have a pretty narrow target share there. So I think he's going to, provide a pretty high floor for a late round tight end. And he does have massive upside. If either Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson go down, like he could be a top 5 or top 10 tight end. So I love taking Irv Smith as a late round flyer.
Yeah, I love Smith as well. I love both Smiths, Irv and Jonnu. But the guy I'm going to go with is Tywer Higbee. I think with Gerald Everett gone, Tywer Higbee is going to play the kind of snaps that we saw him play during that monster finish to the 2019 season. And overall that season, I mean, he ended up with 4.6 catches for 49 yards per game. And I think that actually is a realistic outcome, given the fact that Cam Akers went down for the Rams. You have Matthew Stafford, so you have a quarterback you're more confident with. I just think you could see a lot of throws for the Rams, even though their defense is pretty good. Them being a pass-heavy team and with a better quarterback. So I think Higbee could be the number 3 target on that team, and I think his snap rate goes up a ton. So like Tyler Higbee to maybe give us some of that magic that he gave us late in 2019. Again, in 2021, Samantha, your top 5 tight ends in terms of, we'll go half PPR here. Who are your top 5 tight ends for 2021?
Yeah, my top 5 tight ends for this year are going to be Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, George Kittle, and then Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts.
John, how about you? Top 5.
My top 5 tight ends are Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, George Kittle, Mark Andrews, and then TJ Hawkinson.
And my top 5 tight ends for 2021 are Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, George Kittle, TJ Hawkinson, number 4, and then Mark Andrews, number 5. All right. And final question before we get out of here. Most overrated tight end. Samantha, I'll start with you.
Yeah, most overrated tight end as things stand right now is Dallas Goddard. I've seen him go really, really high in drafts, as high as I think pick 6 in one of my drafts. And I just think with Zach Ertz kind of lingering and this offense, there's a lot of question marks. I think he's an extremely talented tight end, but it seems like he has a floor kind of much lower than where I've been seeing him go.
Sean, how about you? Most overrated tight end for 2021? Most overrated tight end for 2021 is Rob Gronkowski. He was pretty much unplayable last season, weeks 1 through 4, when OJ Howard was healthy and active. And then, Gronk didn't really break out until week 5 after Howard went down. So now that OJ Howard is back, this is going to be a 2 to 3-way tight end committee. It's going to make Gronk a very touchdown dependent tight end. He's going to be pretty inconsistent. So I'm avoiding him at his ADP. Right now it's tight end 10. So I'm considering Gronk to be the most overrated for 2021.
Yeah, Gronk and Goddard were both on my list, but I'm going to have to go with Noah Fant just because he's going as a tight end 7. And I really see a scenario where he doesn't even finish in the top 12, despite his talent. You have a ton of wide receivers on the Broncos, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Tim Patrick. You have a really good defense, and you have Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock, two guys at quarterback that you're not going to throw a lot. Even if you were a bad team, really, you're going to try to have them manage the game. So I think Noah Fant could disappoint going at the tight end 7. In those top 80 picks, you could still get a sweeper at running back or wide receiver 2 or 3. So I just don't see it for Noah Fant. He's my most overrated tight end for 2021. Samantha, this was a lot of fun. I really thank you for joining us. I'm glad everyone finally got to hear you and hear your analysis, and tell everyone what you're up to and where they can find you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on to talk about the most exciting position in fantasy football. Yeah, you can find all of my written work on theactionnetwork.com. And I've been doing a lot of these player profiles and been talking roundtables with you guys as the season progresses. And hopefully you guys will have me back on during the season.
Oh, yeah, we'll definitely have you back. So thank you again for joining us. And of course, you can find Sean on Twitter at @the_oddsmaker. And you can find me on Twitter at Chris Raybon. You can find us both by those same handles in the Action Network app. Go download it and find all our fantasy content and our fantasy football draft tool at actionnetwork.com as well. Until next time, let's get this shmoney.